Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Seth Dellinger, and this is the Embodied Dialogue podcast. And I'm very pleased to be speaking today with Wendy Dolber. So, welcome, Wendy.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Uh, so, you and I had a number of conversations earlier this year, which will probably come up in our conversation. But let me just say a few words of introduction to listeners about you. You are a writer and a coach. It says on your website, I kind of was amused. You said long before there was a coaching industry, you were already working to help people with their lives, going back to the days of the human potential movement, where it sounds like you explored all kinds of different modalities. But you also said on your website that there's a particular one called the option method that won out hands down. And so this is how I met you, is because I heard about the option method and I wanted to explore the form of dialogue that you do. And so we did a number of dialogues. But you're also, you have 40 years of business experience as a manager and analyst in the affordable housing and finance industry. And maybe just as a short introduction of option, and you're going to tell us much more. But again, I just wanted to read something from your website. It says, the idea that people are not victims of chance and circumstance, but choose their beliefs, feelings, and actions is the core principle of the option method. And then you also said, because the method is essentially a practice of critical thinking that drills down to the core of what motivates us and energizes us, it has been an indispensable tool in my management work and my coaching practice. So you studied with Bruce Di Marsico, who created the method. You were his close friend. And so you've really also been part of the history and the unfolding of this method. So you just bring a wealth of experience. And anyway, that's my version of the introduction. Is there something more that you would like for listeners to know about you here at the beginning of our conversation?
I don't know. I have a Boston Terrier that drives me crazy. Yeah, I'm working on, I have a book out called The Guru Next Door, which I wrote because I wanted to, it's a fictional work, but I wrote it because I wanted people to know what Bruce was like
Mhm.
and about the option method. And it's told through the eyes of a child, and she grows up over the course of the book, living in a house next door. So that's to Bruce, that's the artifice that I created.
Mhm.
So that book has been out for a while, and but people are still reading it and commenting on it. I'm working on another book, which is called Making Space for Happiness, and that's going to be more like a guide to the option method. And I'm doing that because um, a lot of people come to me and tell me that they've been trying to do the option method on their own, or they have been doing it on their own. And so I thought this would be good, just a guide for those kind of people who want to do that, because some people they don't have access to doing dialogues on a regular basis, or they would just rather do it on their own,
Right.
which is very possible to do. Yeah, so I'm working on that book now, and I'm also a fiction writer. So the Guru Next Door is fiction, and I've just written two other works of fiction that I'm in the process of getting out there,
Mhm.
hopefully.
Yeah, great. So you mentioned the name of your forthcoming book is A Space for Happiness. And you also mentioned this modality is something that a person can do on their own, or it's something they can do in dialogue with you. So there is a method to the option method, obviously, but in my experience, and I think in talking with you, one of the things I understood is that before we even get to the method, there's a whole understanding of what happiness is, or maybe we could also say what happiness isn't. There's collected works of Bruce Di Marsico have the title "The Myth of Unhappiness." So even that title might confront something, might be confronting to people. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little about these very familiar words, happiness and unhappiness, but there's a really unique perspective on what those words mean and how we might arrive at being happy or unhappy, which is really, I think, important to get before we say, well, how do I do the option method?
Yes, yes, that is important. And it comes up a lot. Sometimes people will say to me, "Well, I don't need the option method because I'm not sad." Well, it's I'm not depressed. It's not really. That's just a little area that it can deal with, but it's a lot more than that. So, you know, we should start with what happiness is and what we mean by happiness, at least when we talk about the option method. And because for each person, happiness has different meanings. And but the meaning that option has is basically, on one level, it's the lack of unhappiness. It's the lack of unhappy beliefs or the belief that life is a slippery banana peel and it's going to take you down at some point into the doldrums of unhappiness. So happiness is, the concept of happiness and option is that it's kind of like we're all a blank slate, really. We're all, and that we could be happy at any time for any reason or for no reason at all. So when I say a blank slate, I mean a blank slate for happiness, for happy feelings, that it's in essence who we are. If you want to think, what's my purpose? Well, to be happy is a perfectly fine purpose for anyone to have and live their lives. So happiness in the option method means freedom, freedom to feel the way that you would love to feel and not be beholden to negative beliefs that affect every step of your life. So, and it's your natural state. It's a natural, you would be happy naturally if you were not unhappy. And so happiness can have a lot of feeling. It could be joy, it could be okay, it could be satisfied, ecstatic. There's a lot of different feelings that go with what we think of as happiness. But that's how we think of it in the option method. So be happy and find out what it feels like. You know. So unhappiness. Um, in option, we describe it as any feeling you have that you don't like. So that covers a lot of territory. So it could be um, pissed off. It could be aggravated, nervous, anxious, sad, depressed, itchy, antsy. Um, I hate myself. It's it's all of those feelings that we have that we don't like. Boredom. It's not restricted to just sad or what we usually think of as unhappy. It's uncomfortable feelings that we don't like and we don't agree with. And, that's not to say that we have to dislike all the feelings of unhappiness because we're perfectly free to love any feeling that we have. Options for people that want to change how they feel and how they think. It's never saying you should be happy or you should feel differently.
Right. Because I think that even for someone listening so far who this is new to, there's a lot of room for misunderstanding. It's like, oh, are you saying I'm just if I'm unhappy, it's my fault because I forgot to be happy because it's my natural state? Or you're telling me that, if I just got in a car accident, I'm supposed to be happy, or there's no reason to be unhappy about that. And I know that in our discussions, like one of the things that I kind of ran up against in different places was, and my impression is this is a common thing that you notice with clients is I kind of say like, well, Wendy, I'm really unhappy about this situation, but come on, anyone would be unhappy in whatever the situation was. So anyway, I just want to ask you to maybe like go one more round on this for anyone who's thinking this, how does this add up? How does this make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I, that statement, anyone would feel bad about this. Um, we experience that as true in our lives. It's actually not true because there's the circumstances and there's the reaction to it. And everyone does not have the same reaction to the same circumstances. They just don't. They react according to what they believe. But when you take a description of something like a car accident, it's kind of hard to believe that anyone wouldn't be upset about it. You know, but the question is, whenever anyone says that to me, you anyone would have to be unhappy. I always say, well, they would have their reasons. What are your reasons? Because the fact that everybody gets unhappy is not a reason to give up on the idea that we don't have to be unhappy. And option isn't saying that, as you said, people should be happy, they should be unhappy. It's creating a new way of thinking about emotions, which is that things don't just happen to us. We're not pawns in the game of life, that our emotions are not, we're not puppets on a string. Well, what other analogies could I possibly pull into this? But, we have a choice about how we feel. And the way that we kind of exercise that choice is about what we believe. And so that is really the thing that separates people. It's in order for you to be unhappy about something, you have to believe that it's a reason to be unhappy. And without that belief, you could never be made to be unhappy. And we all have our own beliefs. And yes, there are a lot of situations where it's commonly agreed that people are going to be unhappy or should be unhappy. But we're creating a brave new world here. We're creating together, people who want to think about this idea that we don't have to be unhappy. We're creating a brave new world where our consciousness is going to be expanded beyond that. So that a person could actually be in a car crash and just simply say, thank God I'm not dead, or thank God it wasn't worse, or there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, or it is what it is. That's what happened today.
Right. Yeah, and as I was reading, some of the old lectures of Bruce Di Marsico, he'll often start with something that's sort of on the surface, and as you pointed to, and this is central to the option method, is examining what are the beliefs. Like, what is maybe we could say in this case, what are the preconditions that made me think I had no option except to be unhappy about the car crash or whatever? And then if I find what that belief is, what I notice with Bruce is he keeps saying, well, that belief rests on a belief. It's almost like there's a series of beliefs, and some of the core beliefs come back to where we started. Like, I have a belief that this is what happiness is, or I have a belief, that everyone would obviously be unhappy under certain circumstances. One of the key distinctions is between needs and wants. So like if we talked about money, a person would say, well, I'm not happy because I don't have enough money. And there's like this idea, well, I would need a certain amount of money. I need this much money. Like there's when that many dollars go into my bank account, like ding, I'll be happy. Which sounds simplistic, but it's also possible, as I understand it, to have the view that I have a target, let's say income, which isn't currently my income, but that I don't actually have to be unhappy despite not yet having that income, which is my target.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of situations where people don't have money. That is the reason for them to be unhappy. I mean, some people who don't have money are starving. They don't have a place to live, and or it could be a situation like you described. I just don't have as much money in my bank account as I think I need to be happy. And that's the whole idea, that we believe that our happiness is connected to having things. And, we all know about very unhappy people who are very wealthy, for example, who want to stay on the idea of money. So we see that money doesn't necessarily bring happiness, but we always think it's going to be different for us, because I would know how to I would be happy. I know that I would be happy and I wouldn't be unhappy. But that's the idea of happiness that um, it is the reason why people get unhappy, because they believe that they need things to be happy. And
Mhm.
it could be a little confusing to think about that, because when we get things that we want, it does feel good and we are happy. But that doesn't mean that we need those things in order to be happy. So, at a certain point with option, you have to understand that um, it's a way of thinking about happiness and unhappiness. It's not prescriptive, like we were saying. You should feel this way, you should not feel this way. But what it does is it elevates your mind out of that trap of, I'll be happy if this, I'll be unhappy if that. That's a whole reality that we construct that keeps us coloring within the lines of life, you know?
Mhm.
And if we want to color outside and really have more joy, more happiness, more freedom, we have to start to shake up that way of thinking about things.
Mhm. Mhm. So there's one more kind of I think core belief that's coming to mind that's related to this, and I'd love to talk about this and then maybe also go into a little more of some of your history and personal experience once we've sort of fleshed some of these things out. But just for convenience, if we stay with that idea that, I want to make a certain amount of money and I don't have that amount of money yet. If I if I say, okay, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna figure this out, I'm gonna make that amount of money. Maybe I need a plan, maybe I need a new job, whatever it is. But something I need is motivation. And this is another thing that in option we notice again and again is that we have ideas about where motivation comes from related to happiness and unhappiness. So I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because you did mention wants and needs, and I didn't really talk about it. But yeah, first of all unhappiness is a motivation. So, it's interesting to think of it that way. Once you understand that it's not just happening to you, that there is a belief, the belief is always connected to the motivation, the reason why we believe it's a good idea to be unhappy in the first place, you know, so that I will, you know. And so needs and wants. Wants are, we just want something and we're going to be happy if we have it and happy if we don't have it. A need is different. A need is, I'll be happy if I have it, but unhappy if I don't have it. And so, in terms of types of motivation, those are the two types of motivation. And you could say wanting is happy motivation and needing is unhappy motivation. But the interesting thing is that, if you take fear as an example of needing to, let's say, perform, um, that's, and people use, we all know, hear stories of people who use fear to get themselves to do something. If I, think of performers. If I wasn't afraid when I got on the stage, I wouldn't know that I really cared about this performance. And it's a mindset about what we need to show up in the best way possible.
Mhm.
But fear would never do anything for us if the desire or the want was not there. So, I mean, you can stick all the pins you want in yourself to get yourself to be a certain way. But if you're not wanting to be that way first, it's never going to work. So I think that, people often think fear works, but it's really not the fear that works at all. It's it's the wanting that works.
Mhm.
So, again, we're not saying it's wrong to be afraid of things and it's wonderful to want things. It's just a really nice way to live. And even though it might seem that fear works, is that really how we want to proceed? Is that how we want to live our lives,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know, with a gun to our head?
Right, right. Well, and I also remember, and I feel like this came up in some of the dialogues we did, where if I imagine a situation that just, at least in my imagination, seems awful, but you might say to me, suppose you found yourself in that situation, but you actually were not unhappy. And it's, first of all, I have to say, well, is that possible? And then you're saying, well, suppose it was. Would that be okay? Or would you fear being in that situation, which you say would make you unhappy, but what would it be like to find out that you're totally fine in that situation? And it's on the face of it, it kind of feels like, oh, well, if I could be perfectly happy in that situation, great. But when the question first lands, it kind of lands like, oh my God, like I'm not sure what would that would be like. Like I remember I was doing one of the sort of I was doing one of the self-guided kind of processes, or at least as well as I understood it. And I was following a series of questions and imagining something. And I basically imagined a person who I don't like being around. And I imagined it was like the end of my life and this was the last person that I was going to spend my last moments with. And, it was like, well, that would be awful. And the question was like, well, what if it wasn't awful? And I thought, huh. But it really revealed to me that there was this whole potential for an experience that when I really thought about it is like better than anything I could imagine, because my first assumption is if I had to be around that person, like what could be worse? And yet if I think of the worst thing I can think of and it turns out not to be that bad, well, I might be having a totally different kind of life.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes people they resist seeing that they could be happy in a situation because unhappiness is seen as having a kind of
Mm.
power over ourselves, but also over other people. So
Mm.
if somebody's behavior is not what you want, how are you going to show them that if you're not unhappy? That's how we show people that what they're doing is bad. You're making me unhappy. And even as kids, our parents say that to us sometimes, when the mother is just at her wit's end and you're driving me crazy or whatever. So we get this idea at a really early point in life that, um, that we can make other people feel bad, they can make us feel bad, and there's currency in that. So sometimes we don't want to let go of feeling bad because we don't know how to get across what we want to get across. But that's why I love to ask the question, well, since you don't want to feel bad about this, how would you love to get it across? Because when we're unhappy, we just rely on that. Yeah,
Mhm.
so we do whatever we do. We withdraw, we slam doors, we throw things, we yell, we just clam up, we secretly hate the person, whatever we do. And our energy is all going towards that. We're not thinking of how we can try to get what we want from that person.
Mhm.
Or if we really think that we can, walk away. So all of the options that could be available to us if we weren't unhappy are really, they're not as easily seen. Not that you would never do it. You can always walk away and slam the door behind you, but we rely on unhappiness and we value it because it shows people that they did something wrong.
Mm.
And since we have no power over them, we rely on that,
Mhm.
or we think we have no power.
Yeah, one of the things that so interesting to me about option is it's actually incredibly logical. It's just that it goes into areas that, we don't think about. But on this subject of relationship, I was re-listening to one of the talks by Bruce, and he's talking about how something we often do in relationship is we have this belief: if you loved me, you would do XYZ, or you wouldn't do XYZ. And he tells a story of a client, and he says, okay, this is extreme, but to make the point, there was a man that he worked with who had this idea that his mother, who was afraid of mice, if he dangled a mouse in front of his mother shouldn't be afraid of the mouse if she really loved him. And he actually went on to proceed and dangle the mouse. And of course, she got afraid and mad. And then he told Bruce that he had proof that his mother didn't love him. Like he created this whole thing, and it's sort of an extreme. Um, and yet, what option can do is actually show all the steps, that a person will take to do something that might look kind of irrational, but there's actually, there is a certain kind of a logic that we might not say it's that logic itself was that rational, but we could say, oh, these are the steps and these are the kinds of things that we do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it always goes back to the beliefs. I mean, he believed that that would make a difference for her.
Mhm.
And, he was mistaken about that. But if he didn't believe that, he never would have done that. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, in option, we deal with beliefs. The beliefs that we're really trying to latch onto are the beliefs about what makes me happy or unhappy. And that's kind of you know, the central clearinghouse for any behavior. It always goes down to that, because happiness is so important to us, and it's really what we live for, whether we know it or not. And everything we do for happiness. So dealing with beliefs about happiness and unhappiness always gets to the core. So if you want to ever understand your behavior, that's the starting point of your discussion. At some point, you can't just question, why did you do that? Why did you do that? Why did you do that? You have to get down to the feelings, because the feelings lead to the beliefs, and that's how you get there. There is, in that whole thing, there is some reason why the guy with the mouse thought that he had to be unhappy because of what his mother was doing. And
Mhm.
that's the important thing in that whole scenario.
Right. And it seems like part of what's important is proving that his belief is correct, as opposed to maybe questioning and doing something else to shift that relationship. Um, but let me ask you now, maybe just because I think we've opened up a number of the aspects of the option method, and I have a feeling they'll keep coming up. But maybe could we just go back into your history a bit, how you discovered option, maybe where you were at, how this work impacted you personally, and I'm sure you'll have stories over the years of clients or other things that you learn in the course of teaching the method. But just wonder if we could situate a little more in your experience now.
Sure. Um, well, I learned about option when I was really young. So I was only 21 or 22. And I had gone to college because I had decided that I wanted to be a therapist. So I went to college and I started taking psychology courses, and it didn't speak to me. I mean, at that time, this was back in the 70s, at that time, positive psychology didn't exist. So, it was still the old paradigm. And it was about being normal and, it was interesting, but it really wasn't, it didn't speak to me. So I changed school. I transferred to another school. But during the summer, I was working in the city for the rent commissioner, and a brochure crossed the desk for this crazy little place called GROW. It was called Group Relations Ongoing Workshops. And it was a place where they were teaching people to be group leaders, or if you were a group psychotherapist, or it was for lay people and professional people. And a lot of people taught that who had created their own modalities. So I studied there, and I went through, I think you needed 27 courses. I took the 27 different modalities. So it was quite an education. And Bruce was the last one I took. It was hard to get into his classes. So I didn't mention that he was teaching there, but yes, he was teaching there. And so I had it narrowed down to behaviorism and hypnosis. Like, I really like things that work, and but then I went into his class, and he was saying that if we're unhappy, it's not because of what's happening to us, but it's because of what we believe. It just blew my mind. I mean, I saw the implications of that in so many different ways. And at that time, I was this unhappy little girl, and I who thought that she was um, ruined is a strong word, but let's say negatively affected by her upbringing.
Mhm.
So, I was from a broken home. My parents divorced when I was 4. We moved around a lot. My mom wasn't particularly attentive, let's say. I felt abandoned a lot, shuttled around, living with different relatives and all that. So when I heard him say that and he talked about that, I immediately started to see that that wasn't true. I'm not just a product of my environment. I have choices about how I can feel, and so the change was already taking place within me. And so I decided I didn't want to be a psychotherapist. I just wasn't attracted to it. I just wanted to study with Bruce. And so that's what I did. And, at that time, not being a licensed, you know, coaching didn't exist, and not being a licensed professional, it was hard to get clients. And I had these other skills, that related to business. And it just seemed so effortless for me to be successful there. I don't know why that is, but it just is. And I option helped me tremendously as I rose up in the organization that I was in and had more and more responsibility and was handling huge deals and dealing with Congress and um, heads of state agencies and political people and developers. It's like the challenge of a lifetime. I was cool as a cucumber all the time,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
managing people also. I was always the one in the room who wasn't upset about what was going on. I was always the one who was thinking, okay, how can we fix this?
Mhm. I was really struck on the website by that one line where you said the option method was such a resource for you in business. And so, I've understood the option method in terms of the themes we've discussed so far. But now you're saying, look, I was in this situation, this business situation, there was a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility. Sounds like there's a hierarchy, and we can imagine, people climbing up the ladder and being unhappy with each other, or all of that maneuvering. I mean, you've already sort of answered it. You said I was cool as a cucumber, but it it just underlines, like, if I am in a high pressure situation, but each little thing that happens, I'm suddenly super happy because it's working out my way, and then now it's not, and I'm like crushed, and I'm going back and forth. It just sounds like you had something maybe from option that just was stable despite maybe external circumstances being
Yeah,
down quite a
yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, you have a completely different perspective than anyone else has.
bit.
You just don't believe that you're subject to the tides of what's going on. And there was a lot that was going on, including, professional things, or, being passed over for promotion and getting a promotion, whatever. Um, Having people report to you, having to deal with that. And did I mention the mega million and billion-dollar deals? You know, um, but when you have this perspective that, you know, nothing can make me unhappy, and you understand all of that unhappiness is a construct, a made up construct. It's not necessarily the way you have to be or the way you will be. It changes how you see everything. And so I always felt like I was, I'm going to say, in a bubble, but I didn't really feel that separated from people. But I just meant that I was kind of immune.
Mhm.
And my people that reported to me, somebody once said to me, "You're the same no matter what," you know, and I was, and if they came in with their tail between their legs, which happened on a pretty regular basis, oh, this got messed up, that got messed up, I would just say, well, let's look at it, let's see what can be done. There was no blaming in there, no anger, no blaming, and so when you're free of all of that, um, you can be a force to be reckoned with. And I was able to get to a very high level without even having the credentials that other people had.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons is because I was willing to do anything. Whatever needed to be done. I think I cleaned the bathroom once, but whatever needed to be done, I would do if it was going to help us get to where we were going to go. And I had that freedom.
And it sounds like you were not lacking motivation by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I was so motivated, and I always felt like it was a game that I was playing,
Mm.
and I wanted to see how well I could play the game,
Mhm.
and how much more responsibility could I get, and it was it wasn't a grabby kind of a thing. It was just fun, and I enjoyed for the most part, you know. Then it got really, really difficult, but because of circumstances. But I really, really loved my job. and I totally enjoyed myself, and I could be myself there.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, so I'd love to ask you about a little more about what you already mentioned in terms of your relationship with other people, and I think this would probably get into your work, um, you know, with clients as well. But I remember in one of our conversations, I described a very unpleasant interaction I had with the person, and one of the questions I think you asked me in one way or another was essentially like, do you have a belief that you should never run into people who are unpleasant, or do you believe that unpleasant people shouldn't be there? And, on the face of it, I was kind of like, well, no, I don't think that. But when I really checked, it was like, maybe I do deep down in me sort of think that. Maybe I need to discard that belief. But in any case, you told me a story, and I think it might have been earlier in the chronology than what you were just speaking about. But you talked about being a secretary in office and someone wanting to come in, wanting to see your boss, and your boss was busy, and the person just losing it.
Yeah.
But you described that you just saw how unhappy he was. Like, so what that said to me is like, if you come to a place of calm and ease and like there's a lack of noise in your system, it also gave you a totally different potential for how you would interact with others and how you would see others. Um,
Yeah. 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 He was screaming at me in my face. And I was just standing there, and this feeling was coming up, and it turned out to be a huge smile. It was totally disarming. It worked out well. It didn't have to work out that well, but it did. But yeah, I mean, we we choose how we want to be in different situations, but in order to really have that choice, we have to understand why we react to things the way we do. And that's what option helps you to do. It helps you to take a situation, this is like the top line of the situation. I'm angry at this person. Um, I don't like being around them. And spiraling down with these fantastic questions to get to the motivating belief. What is what is the reason why I think that I have to be unhappy in this situation? Um, and it happens very quickly.
mhm. Right. So it's never just that I am unhappy. It's that I believe that I have to be unhappy right now. And I'm just doing what I ought to do given what I
Yeah.
believe to be the case about how I would obviously, how anyone would obviously respond to what's happening to me. But then the revelation is like, maybe that's actually not true.
Well, yes, um, we really believe in our unhappiness. When we're unhappy, we really believe it's a good thing to do. And we also believe that it's not good to be happy.
Hmm.
So, you know, that bears looking at. You can really look at that and question that and see, well, why? What if you were not unhappy in this situation? How could that be bad for you? Which is actually one of the last option questions we ask, because it gets to the motivation. But sometimes you can't just jump in and ask that question, although it can be very revealing. Like in any unhappy situation, you could always ask yourself, well, what if I wasn't unhappy right now? You could. And that will be very revealing. But it's not going to reveal as much if you really took your time and understood, well, what am I unhappy about? What is there about that I'm unhappy about? And then why am I unhappy about that? Then you get to what if I wasn't unhappy? Because when we're in that kind of a situation where we're just caught up in unhappiness, sometimes we don't even really know really what we're unhappy about. We think it's about one thing, but it's really about something else. And
Mhm.
that's why it's can be really important to take your time and go through these. questions and find out. You know, like, I really hate the way this person is being. You know, it's when you go through that, it's, well, what am I doing to cause it? That's really the fear. It's not really about them at all. It's about me.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, there's somewhere in one of the writings where Bruce says something like, he's talking about how this comes up, and a person will say, "Well, I'm afraid that if I was happy in this situation, it would reveal that I don't care." And then he sort of says, "Well, the truth is maybe you don't care. And
Right.
you're worried about finding out." But I mean, if I've been playing this game, like I imagine, like maybe the motivation is, well, if I was a good person, I would care about this, and I can't not be a good person. But if the reality is deep down, whatever the thing is that I think good people care about is not something I care about, it's that idea that I'm a good person that's actually keeping me from being freer, being happier. Um, and then maybe I think this is in the direction you were going. He says elsewhere that like we even think of a happy person as a crazy person.
Yeah. Yeah. And the big fear is if I was a happy person, I wouldn't care about anything. And,
Mhm.
I mean, in Bruce's class, we used to call it the bump on the log syndrome.
Mhm.
We would, because that idea of feeling bad to prove the value of things is so, you know, so much a part of our thinking,
Mhm.
that it's hard to disengage from that. And also the idea that our desires, that we wouldn't have any desires, that happiness equals no desires. And maybe it does in a sense, but maybe it's just that it's it wouldn't be desires in the way that we have historically thought of them. We're always going to want something. That's part of being human. I mean, even if it's just, well, I've been sitting on out in the middle of this field for 2 days. I think I'll get up and find something to eat now. There's always going to be something that we want.
Mhm.
And, the idea that happiness means you won't want anything, that's just a fear.
Mhm.
Yeah, again, because it just goes back to the whole idea that unhappiness is it's a weapon. It's a way that we control things. It's a way that we let people know that they're hurting us. It's something that we cling to as a culture. We really cling to it. And it goes back to the beginning of everything.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, because of my background working with the Feldenkrais method, and I know that you're also certified as a yoga teacher and have done a fair amount of embodiment work. That was one of the things that really excited me was when I found out the connection with embodiment work. And something that often comes up with people I work with is the inner critic or the that word we use, I should do something, which is often the justification to do the thing I don't want to do. uh, but your example of I'm sitting in this meadow, I think I'll get up, like even movement, and I think Bruce writes about this, is essentially the result of desire. Like I desire not to be here anymore, I desire to be there, and so I move. And that, what I also really love about that is that I don't have to language that. I just stand up and go somewhere. But with this should, he has something he says somewhere where it's like I notice all the dishes in my sink and I tell myself I should do the dishes. But he says when you say that, what you're saying to your body, what your body is hearing is the last thing in a million years I want to do is go do the dishes. So then when I go and do the dishes, and I have this experience of I don't want to do this. And there's this, like, even on the level of my body, I feel some tensing or some resistance to it because I have this belief that I'm only doing it because I must and I really don't want to. But, I'd probably be really unhappy if my sink was just kept filling up. It's like I've created this whole possible situation where I just have to endure this unhappiness while I'm standing at the sink doing the dishes.
Yeah, well, you know, when we use words like should, have to, ought, it goes back to, again, what you were saying. I'm a good person. I deserve to be happy. How many times have we done something and then said, I deserve a treat now? Why? For doing what you want? Should carries, like when we want somebody else to do something, it's sometimes we feel like it's not enough to say, I would really love for you to do this, but you should. And we think that, well, she should really be doing this and he should be doing it and I should. We all should, And it's what that's saying is that that word has more power than I want. I want seems like a kind of like a flimsy word, a selfish word, it's a babyish word. It's not. It's a very powerful word. And should seems like the powerful word because it's laying a judgment over the whole thing. You know, you should do this or else. There's always an or else. And I mean, you can use the word and, oh, I should really get up now, meaning if I don't get up now, I'm going to miss the train. I'm not talking about that use of the word. I'm talking about using it as a club.
Right. Right. Well, so you've mentioned, a person can do a process by themselves. They can work with an option method practitioner like yourself. But would you like to say a little more about the process? And also, we kind of went back in history, and then we came back to some of the general themes. So, if there's anything that happened over the years as you began to work with clients, like I wonder also just like how this developed for you. It sounds like there was something that really just landed and changed your perspective early on, but then you did this work. You saw all of the different versions of why people believed they had to be unhappy over the years, and worked with a number of people. So I'd love to get into more of your experience with working with the method itself and people you've seen.
Well, first of all, it, if I started with working with the method with myself, and that's kind of what you have to do, because if you're going to work with anyone else, and you have judgments and you have fears, you're not going to be very good at it. So, we all started with that, and I started with doing sessions with Bruce for like about 3 months, and then I was in his training class, and then we were friends, and um, so it became my way of thinking, and and that's been like you know an area of development, to take a practice into yourself. When Bruce passed away in 1995, he wasn't there anymore to ask questions and to do dialogues with, or um, and I felt like I became the teacher then, and decided that I was going to carry his work on. I wasn't the only one doing it, but I was going to do it in my way. Um, and I always worked with people. Even after I started, I would have my day job, and then I would run out and go do a session with somebody, and I always did it. And in I knew that I wanted to write a book about it, and Deborah, Bruce's widow, she had given me all of his writings to take care of. And she also took a massive amount of his writings. Um, and with the help of someone called Ari Nielsen, who's an angel, put together this, the 3-volume set of this. And she put out, other books by him. Um, but I didn't know. I felt like I wanted to do something with these papers, and it ended up where I wrote The Guru Next Door, and that's what I used a lot of his writings in there, but it kind of inspired me to do that. And so, um, over the years, I have seen a lot of clients, and I still am seeing people still available. Um, and what I have found, well, first of all, I love doing dialogues with people. It's really my happy place. I mean, I guess everything is my happy place, but I feel like it's a wonderful gift to be able to express what I know and to help people disentangle and to really see them change. But it doesn't always happen because honestly, a lot of people are very resistant to this way of thinking.
Mm.
I mean, there's a fair amount of people that would just forget it. I'm never going there. You know, but there are also many people who absolutely adore it and has changed their life. I'm always getting people especially lately, people that are coming to me and saying, "I had this book on option like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and I can't find it, so I'm calling you," or "I can't find the questions," or "I had the book, but I just read it," and they want to get started with it. So. Um, yeah, I've had some really amazing experiences working with people. And it's the main thing for me lately is that I Bruce didn't really focus on this so much, but I'm trying more to help people to employ what they've learned. Because what I find is that people will see the belief, and it is the core belief of why they're unhappy, but it doesn't make a difference for them,
Mm.
and sometimes that's because they haven't worked it through all the way. But sometimes it's because people just get caught up in being intimidated by how the fear that they were working on, how it keeps rising up again, it keeps coming back. But it's not really coming back. You're just remembering that you used to be afraid, but you have a choice now about how to be different. And that's the important thing for anybody that's working with the method to know is that it's just a method. You have to make it work for you. So when you find out that you hated your mother for years because um, she should have taken better care of you, I'm not talking to you, I'm just anybody. She should have taken better care of you, and that the reason why you're unhappy is because today about that is because you want her to understand that what she did was bad for you. It's a way of holding her feet to the fire in a way. And you've seen that you've really just been blaming her and wanting her to feel bad and feel guilty so that you can be happy. You see all that, but then you keep getting angry, but you really don't believe in the anger anymore. But it will sometimes keep rising up again because our brains, that's the way our brains work. Our brains kind of like the tried and true. And if you want to think differently about things, so you have to make it work for you. When you see a belief that you have to be unhappy about something and you want to stop believing it, first of all, you have to really appreciate the fact that you have just seen a belief that you didn't even know you had, that you always thought was just true, and
Mhm.
you've learned something fundamental about the way your mind works. So what are you going to do with that information? How are you going to make it real for you? And it's not going to be the same for everyone. For me, my experience of it was always to really appreciate it, and then I would just see things. things would just be revealed to me. I would notice something that I never noticed before about myself, about somebody else. So with my clients, so what I like to do now is I like to help them. I will ask them, okay, now that you know that, how are you going to make it real for yourself?
Hmm. I mean, in that story, it occurs to me that one response I could have is, oh, you mean all this time I've blamed my mother for everything? That wasn't the cause. And then now I have a problem maybe with facing up to what I've done this whole time. I mean, there'd be grief or there'd be anger directed at myself or all the time that I've lost. Maybe I could have had a great relationship with her. Um, so I can see how that just unfolds into all of these other
Yeah.
things that now I have to look at.
Yeah, and those are wonderful things to know, to get to that point where you could say you actually see the belief, and then and that's a very common thing to see it, and then for someone to say, "Oh my God, that was so stupid." But,
Mhm.
I always say, well, did you think it was going to be rocket science? It's not rocket science. These things are very simple. They are very simple, but it just doesn't seem that way. When you're in the throes of misery and, it's not simple, but it is,
Mm.
if you unravel it, knowing that, I mean, really all you're doing is questioning unhappiness. That's all you're doing.
Mhm.
Instead of going through life acting as if we all have to be unhappy in this situation, that situation, the other situation, or any situation, we're just going to be unhappy. To question it, well, why? Why are you unhappy? Why are
Mhm.
you unhappy about this? Why about that? Why? What if you weren't? But it has to be asked in a certain way. It has to be asked in a loving, compassionate way, unconditionally loving way, because if people are unhappy, they really are suffering. It's
Mhm.
horrible to be unhappy.
Yeah.
It's a terrible, horrible feeling. And, but, but that doesn't mean it has to be that way. But we can have compassion for people who are suffering, but also not feeling sorry for them, but knowing that, hey, there's a way out if you want to look at this differently. And
Yeah.
if you don't, well, so be it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I got so much insight from the dialogues that I did with you, and I certainly would recommend anyone listening to contact Wendy to learn more about option. There's a couple of different websites, including there's a place where you can listen to some of the recordings of Bruce Di Marsico speaking, and there's some information about the process. Like basically, you can sit with your journal and do this kind of inquiry. Um, just before we finish, it just occurred to me because we had some discussion on, sort of the world today. Like one of the things that everyone's talking about that we talked about was AI. I could see how AI, we might say, could change our relationship to motivation or those kinds of things. But, there's a lot of polarization in politics. There's concern about really just the future of the human species with the climate and other things like that. So, yeah, whether or not it's in reference to option, I'm just kind of wondering because you do have, and it seems like you've deeply embodied this perspective, which is so unique. I'm just wondering, kind of, what do you see in the world today, and how does I mean the things I'm mentioning here, I think there's a lot of people who would kind of look at the world today and say, well, we're screwed, everything's going down the drain. I never really got that impression from you when we spoke, but I wonder how you would speak to our world today.
Wow, that's a question.
Oh, it's the grand finale. We're at the end of our
Well, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with my sister. Um, where she was so, really, she might be watching this, but I'm going to say you were ranting and raving about, the situation. And I said, well, maybe you don't have to see it that way. You know, what if you took the emotion out of it and stood back and just said, this is happening, that's happening. And she said, well, you always think that there's a reason to feel good about everything. And I said, it's not that I think that there's a reason. Everything that happens is good. It's we don't have to look at it as horrible. And what I mean by that is that things sort out the way they sort out because of what people do. And when you know that there's well, I don't believe that there's evil in the world.
Hmm.
But when you know that everything that people do, if it's something that you don't like or you don't want, it's because they're unhappy in some way. It's For me, I feel immediately compassionate towards them. That doesn't mean that I like what they're doing.
Mhm.
It just means that I understand that they're suffering, and that's why they're doing these things. However, yes, there are a lot of scary things happening in the world, and what I feel about it is, for one thing, I'm just like I'm amazed by it. I'm amazed by how things could be so unraveled.
Mhm.
And I'm also appreciative of the fact that such a thing could be possible because it's happening because on some level it's being allowed to happen. And I'm always hoping that things will turn around in a way that's going to be good for everyone. But I have hope that it will because I believe in the essential goodness of people and AKA the happiness of people. And as I said before, people want to be happy. And although it may seem that things are going to hell in a handbasket, there's a lot of people out there that want to take care of things. And so I have a lot of confidence in that. And sometimes when I think about young people and I think, oh my God, what are they going to have to go through? I also think, yes, but they will deal with it in the best way they know how. So I have confidence in that. And I have confidence in all of us that we're going to deal with whatever. I mean, it's always wonderful to see how, when there's a disaster, people come together.
Mhm.
So, in the midst of an experience that could be, people could say is a horrible experience, well, guess what? It's not a horrible experience because it was a time that people came together to help each other. And so, when I see things happening, I kind of feel that there's no point in remonstrating against it because things have to happen the way they happen. We can't prevent that just because we don't like it. We really wouldn't want it to be that when you throw a snowball through somebody's window, that it makes a right turn and doesn't go through. Or maybe we would want that, I don't know. But as an example of something, we want things to unfold the way that they have to unfold them. And we also want things to be okay. And it's okay to have those two things happening at the same time. So, yes, I am like everybody else, I guess, deer in the headlights and amazed by what's going on. But I feel very confident. I feel confident that it's not only that things are going to be okay, but more okay than we ever dreamed possible.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's not because of what they're doing. It's because of what all these other people are doing. And yeah, so I could get excited by it.
Mhm. Well, what I'm hearing is even if I feel like a deer in headlights, that doesn't mean I have to be unhappy. I could just say, wow, this is the experience. And there seems just to be um, the compassion that you mentioned, but also just this endless kind of curiosity and wonder at what might be possible. Because you're not foreclosing too soon by assuming that this automatically leads to, something awful. Even if we can't predict, we don't need to rush ahead to make the bad consequences in the future direct something that I'm doing now because that hasn't actually unfolded yet.
Right. And you said it a lot better than I did, you know. And, Bruce used to say, isn't it bad enough that you have cancer? Or isn't it bad enough that your house burned down? Or isn't it bad enough that you lost all your money? You have to be unhappy about it too. So it's not the same.
Mhm.
Being unhappy is a different level of suffering, you know.
Yeah.
And it's really and I have to say that sometimes when I hear about what people who are affected by, these terrible things that are happening, let's globally, um, when I hear them talk about it, um, you don't so much hear the unhappiness, oh, that this is happening to me. It's more like, what can I do to help myself? What can I do to help somebody else? How can I have my life back again?
Mhm. Yeah.
I think that when we're afraid of things, the fear of that thing happening in the future is always worse than how we're going to feel when we actually get to that place. Because we may find that when we are in that place of that thing happening that we didn't want to have happen, that we really are okay, and that if we feel unhappy, it's never about the moment. It's about things getting worse or what's going to happen next.
Mm. Yeah. Well, this is, I think, an incredible perspective, and it's kind of amazing when I listen to you how logical it is, and yet how rare it is to hear this perspective. So I really just, I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation. I hope a lot more people will learn about your work and, more broadly, what Bruce Di Marsico, the legacy that he left, his different books and recordings. And I'm looking forward to talking to you again, maybe not on a podcast, but just explore more some of what we've explored already. But
Mhm.
it's a real pleasure, Wendy. Thanks for being with me here today.
My pleasure. I hope I answered your questions.
This is great. I mean, I have 5,000 more, but
Okay.
all right.
My pleasure.